News broke earlier this week that Verra's founding CEO, David Antonioli, who had been at the company for 15 years now, is stepping down. Taking his place to the former president, Judah Simon, who will act as interim CEO. In this video, we'll review the drama taking place with Verra and what all this means for the voluntary carbon markets. Now, anyone paying attention to the carbon markets recently has probably noticed that there's a lot of media coverage on some of the issues the space has right now, which we'll get into in a second. But I want to make this point that carbon credits having a bad rap is not a new phenomenon at all. In 2021, Greenpeace published an article about how carbon offsets are a scam. NBC News covered issues of greenwashing at the same time. And Power Magazine was saying this as far back as 2009, among so many other outlets and institutions. We could be here all day. It's safe to say criticism is not a new thing for this sector. The coverage has grown even stronger in the wrong direction after The Guardian released their hit piece on Verra in January, claiming more than 90% of the REDD+ offsets generated by Verra's projects were phantom credits, where emissions were not actually offset at all, going so far as to say that the projects overstated the threat to forests in these areas by 400% on average. Now, I'm not saying that their claims are entirely incorrect. There is certainly fraud going on in the carbon markets, and carbon registries like Verra need to work on addressing issues like potential overcrediting for projects, among other things. But this article from The Guardian was deeply flawed, according to project developer Everland. And I go over their critiques in this previous video called Carbon Credit Methodologies, Big Changes Coming. So if you want to hear more about why The Guardian was overstating the issue, go check out that video. And Everland was not the only organization involved in the carbon markets to respond to The Guardian either, but their reasoning was quite pointed and fleshed out. But with all this said, The Guardian's article spurred significant controversy with other media outlets stepping in as well, and even countries potentially. Now, I don't know if Zimbabwe was at all influenced by some of the findings by The Guardian. Probably not. They might just be taking advantage of the negative coverage. But the country's government has recently announced that they would further regulate the carbon markets, to move towards resource nationalism. Zimbabwe has declared that all carbon offset deals in the nation were null and void, and they would also take 50% revenue cut from all contracts in the future. Now, it's unclear how this will affect other countries, but it may incite more moves like this towards securing land and disincentivizing foreign investment. So as you can see, the carbon markets are getting a lot of flack recently, so it's no surprise that when the CEO of Verra announces he's stepping down, media outlets quickly drew the connection that this is a sign that he was validating their concerns about fraud in the carbon sector. Now, we can't know for sure, but it seems like this is a decent likelihood. With all that said, David Antonioli was just on the Smarter Markets podcast, a few weeks ago, and I didn't really hear any signs from him that he was considering relinquishing his role as CEO. But he did give this explanation on the podcast of how he thought the carbon markets would have been sorted out, a long time ago. So take a listen.
I took this job in 2008. President Obama had come to town. I figured, great, we're going to have a price on carbon in the US. The EU will ratchet down. Australia will follow, all the rest of the world. And by 2015, we'll have a top-down solution that actually, and climate will be done. And I looked forward to, turning the lights off, closing the door, and saying, let's move on to the next thing. But lo and behold, that didn't happen, right? And I wish it would have. I wish we would have solved the problem earlier, but we haven't. And so we're now in a very different world where you have a bottom-up approach, and maybe this one will work. I hope it will. It's kind of set out, broadly framed under the Paris Agreement.
So maybe he thought everything would have been solved with these markets by now, and he didn't want to deal with this negative publicity anymore. This might have just been planned for quite some time, and we'll talk about that in a second. But whatever his reason for stepping down and just staying on with Verra as a consultant, what does all this mean for the carbon markets? Well, for starters, we'll have to see how Judah Simon handles running the organization. Now, we know that Judith was brought into Verra just in February, and it sounds like the plan transitioning David away from CEO might have been in the works for some time, given the wording on Verra's announcement here. David was quoted saying, "Hiring Judith was a part of Verra's long-term strategy to lead, elevate, and scale the organization. Her business acumen is exactly what Verra needs to better meet the market's growing demands," unquote. Whatever direction Verra takes, it will definitely impact the whole industry, as they are the leading registry in the voluntary carbon markets. We've seen them take steps to combat overcounting already, along with revamping the Red Plus methodology from 5 separate methodologies into one combined standard, with the goal being to consolidate these methodologies together to promote consistency and certainty for project developers, which would have allocated deforestation data for a particular region. There's no need for reference regions. Deforestation risk would be crowdsourced. So there are multiple new additions that Verra is making here to improve the standard. And there are other methodologies that will be updated as well, like Verra's methodology for improved cook stoves. But the point to all this is that the scrutiny brought towards Verra is leading to updated consistency, integrating the latest data and technology available to accurately track estimates, and holding projects accountable when they fail to meet guidelines. And all this will lead to the entire industry continuing to improve over time. In the short term, there may be a variety of attacks and accusations made against the carbon markets, that all of it's greenwashing or the entire space is full of scammers. But it's all in vain, though, because any future based on a net zero climate goal simply won't happen without carbon credits. It's a delusion to think otherwise. Our reliance as a society on fossil fuels is not going away. Greta Thunberg doesn't know the first thing about supply chains or the efficiency of renewable energy. Without natural gas, the world starves, thanks to fertilizer. Without coal, the developing nations in Africa, Asia, and around the globe will not have the energy they need to industrialize. And as I mentioned in other videos, oil is used to make so many household products, it will be near impossible to get rid of its usage entirely. So carbon credits are really the only option we have to offset those emissions. The overzealous environmentalists can argue all they want about how we can do everything on just wind and solar alone, but both physics and reality would disagree. Battery technology is just not ready, and the intermittency of solar and wind will always be an issue otherwise. Carbon credits are the most contrarian investment that I've ever seen in my life. The most obvious use case and necessity in the future, yet so few investors are paying attention right now. And that's what creates opportunities for the investors that can catch on early. So if you'd like to learn more about how you can invest in carbon credits, I'll link to some previous videos I've made on possible investment options in the description below. Thanks for watching.